but I can tell you without fear of contradiction that there is a definite link between viewing pornography and child porn and, porn that's made to look like
Yeah,
your
once you get into the
children,
virtual stuff that's just
and,
computer
and
animated.
and you're headed down that road.
Mhm.
And there is without question a link there, but you have to understand it. It's at the end of the day, it's all about knowledge without fear.
Mm. Welcome to Thinking with Anderson. Have you ever done something that you knew was wrong? Maybe you were doing it and you said, I know this is wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. Or maybe after you did it, you got caught and you say, oh, I knew I shouldn't have done that. That experience is called the weakness of the will. And there's various explanations for it. The most common one is people will say, well, we have desires or appetites and we have our thinking, but our appetites overrule our thinking and we follow them. Now, that's an incomplete answer because unless you're saying you didn't make a choice, you don't have free will, your appetites force you to do it, you still chose them. When you were making that choice, you thought that was a good option. And so in this interview, I want to explore what that says about a person. What does it mean when someone chooses what is objectively evil, but they think it's good? So my guest today, and I'm honored to be speaking with him, is Chris Hansen of the To Catch a Predator franchise. And we see that struggle play out in each of his interviews. When he talks to somebody about this very disturbing behavior, they go through a process of self justification and self deception. And I've never seen them do a specific thing that I'm going to ask Chris about. I'll let you see what I'm going to ask him because they always stop at one level and they never go further than that level. And I can tell he wants them to. He's asking them for that next level, but they can't do it. And so, why do they get stuck there? And what does that say about the human condition? So, in this conversation, I'm going to go beyond the headlines, beyond the cameras, to the real life philosophical problem that occurs when someone says, I knew I shouldn't have done it, but they did it anyway. Chris Hansen, your name and your face is recognizable for your work to catch a predator and that whole franchise. You're still doing this work. And as a philosopher, it fascinates me because the line of questioning that you ask reveals something, I think, about human nature and the problems people face in morality or ethics and sin. And so I've always wanted to ask you about this. And I was so happy when you said you'd be willing to talk with me because this problem is in philosophy is called the weakness of the will. And it comes out like this. You'll do something, you get caught, and there's consequences. And then you say, oh, I knew I shouldn't have done it. But if that's true, then why'd you do it in the first place?
Exactly.
And
And
so, yeah.
an evolving question, Owen, that I ask all the time.
Mm-hmm.
When I started doing these investigations, the predator investigations, 21 years ago this month,
Wow.
I thought, well, first of all, when we did the first one in Bethpage, Long Island, I didn't know anybody was going to show up. We had heard about this online watchdog group, Perverted Justice, which was doing this noble work in the field, and law enforcement was doing some of it too, ICAC and federal authorities and local authorities. But Perverted Justice really got it going. And when they identified somebody who wanted to travel to meet a minor and sexually exploit that child, they would merely post their identity on their website and people could check it out and they could do whatever they wanted with it. And I thought if we could use their ability to be decoys online and our ability to wire a house with hidden cameras and
Yeah.
microphones, like we had done in many other investigations, it could be pretty compelling. But I'm driving out to the Sting House and I start to daydream, getting caught in traffic. And I think, well, what if nobody shows up? What if I've just blown, tens of thousands of dollars of the network's money? And with that, a frantic producer gets on the phone and says, where the heck are you? We've got two guys
Oh, wow.
scheduled to be here in 45 minutes. So at the end of 2.5 days, we had 17 guys show up,
Two and a half
including
days.
a New
Wow.
York City firefighter. So, but even then, Owen, I thought, maybe we'll do this two, three times and
Yeah.
nobody's
I've,
going to show up.
I've
And
heard you
here we
say that.
are 21 years later, and hundreds of men, probably close to 700 by now.
Yep.
And we continue to do these things on True Blue, and we call it Takedown with Chris Hansen now, but it doesn't appear that there's an end in sight.
Well, that's the thing I've heard you say a few times is when you start out, you thought this might be a 1, 2 year thing, but it's kept going to the point where you'll come around the corner and say, "Hi, how are you doing?" And they'll say, "Chris Hansen."
Oh yeah, you're Chris Hansen. I
Yeah.
watch your stories all the time.
Mhm.
I see the older ones on YouTube or on one of your channels, or I've seen the new stuff, or I'm a subscriber, or I listen to the podcast.
Yep.
It's stunning to me.
Yeah.
And you might have a better insight into this repetitive behavior, as you say, philosophically, than I do. I mean, I've got the practical knowledge of seeing it and dealing with it. But again, in the last month, we have caught, I think, 17 or 18 guys. Yeah, 17
Mhm.
guys in the last month in two different jurisdictions. So it's
Yeah.
not going away.
Yeah. It's not decreasing. If anything, maybe your ability to identify them, the kinds of sites they go to, is getting better. So you're exposing it even
Well, I
more.
think so. I think two things are going on, Owen. I think one is in the beginning, we do a sting and maybe we get 25, 30, in one case, 51 guys in, 3 days. And in those days, this activity was somewhat confined to chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo, regional
Mhm. Yeah.
chat rooms of interest, and that antiquated thing that we call MySpace.
Yeah, really, they were using MySpace.
Yeah. And so now, all these years later, I can't even keep up with the
Yeah.
explosion of social media platforms upon which adults can approach children. There was a case in California just within the last few days. We talked about it on the last episode of the podcast, Predators I've Caught, where a guy we caught in Long Beach, California, in a sting, got very light sentence. All these years later, they catch him with a real child
Hmm.
in Orange County. And there were two sites that he was using to communicate with this girl that I had not heard of before. So I share these with
Yeah.
law
Yeah.
enforcement, and we start paying attention to them. But there's been a virtual explosion over the last 21 years
Yeah.
in the number of sites where these guys can approach children.
Yeah. And so the idea of the weakness of the will could have really small examples, right? Like you make a bet at roulette and you lose $20 and you say, "Oh, I knew I shouldn't have put it on that number. I should have put it on this number." But this is really at the level of the biggest stakes possible. I mean, this is like top three bad things you might get involved in.
Life changing in
And it
multiple ways.
doesn't, yeah, and for you, but then what you point out is because I'll often say, "Oh, my life is ruined," but no one has ever said, "Oh, I almost ruined the life of a child." I haven't heard any of them say that. And
Exactly.
and so that those stakes aren't enough to make them think maybe I shouldn't do this. What does that say to you? I mean, just thinking about these persons because you're there with them, you're in the same room with them, you're
It
4 feet away from them.
it says to me that certain people possess this fantasy, this evil, and they let it grow to a point, often fed by an addiction to porn or child
Mm-hmm.
porn. And they get to a point where the porn doesn't satisfy them anymore. And in order to fulfill this fantasy, they take the next step. We had a guy, the latest episode of Takedown, which is out now on True Blue, is a guy who was in Alabama. And based upon the chat with the decoy, I really didn't think he was going to show up because he showed a conscience.
Really?
He was saying things like, "You're too young. I can't do this."
Hmm.
He thought he was talking to a 15-year-old girl and in a scenario where an older female relative was offering the girl for sex.
Yeah, those scenarios blow my mind too. Just the
It
idea
does
that,
blow my mind, but and we should get into that a little bit,
yeah,
but I think it's because these fantasies are being played on Pornhub and other places. So
yeah,
these guys watch this stuff, and whether it's real or not in the porn scenario, they want
yeah,
it in real life, and that's when we see them in our house. But this guy goes on in this, I shouldn't do this. I know it's wrong. Big risk, big reward, and he walks in, and not only is he there to consummate this relationship with a 15-year-old girl, he's got a gun in his waistband
oh yeah, yeah.
which he puts out on the table. If you've seen the last
I saw that
episode,
one. Yeah,
spins it around. It's a little frightening. He had another one in his car, along with 30 credit cards not in his name.
yeah.
So what the heck is he up to besides this?
Did you
Nothing
guys find
good.
out about that? What that was about?
That was just no. We're still
Just
looking into
fraud.
it. Yeah, it's some sort of credit card. You don't have 30
Yeah.
credit cards not in your name in your car. That's a good indication of a criminal enterprise.
Yep.
So we're still fishing around with that. But we see these guys. There's a case, and it's going to get out there very soon. I talk about it on the latest edition of the podcast that comes out next week. A guy we caught in Polk County, Florida, uh, who was out on bond at the time from also getting caught in a sting in Bloomington, Minnesota.
Hmm.
The police department there. He's down in Orlando working at a convention, running the video, running the cameras,
Yeah.
and he takes a break and comes over to try to meet a 15-year-old boy in our sting. So he gets busted there. He gets out on bail, and guess what?
Really?
Days ago, he gets busted with a real child,
Wow.
a real boy.
Yeah, he got past the
Yeah,
decoys to somebody. Yeah.
right. So now he's not going to get out on bond.
Yeah.
But we've seen this play out. People have this notion that, oh, it's a sting operation. It's a reality television show. It's not a
Yeah.
big deal. It wouldn't happen if it wasn't for you guys. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
It would happen. And it does happen even after we catch these guys. So back to the philosophical
Yeah.
discussion of knowing it's wrong, but doing it anyway. And then they go on to blame the child,
Mhm.
to come up with all kinds of
Oh
different
yeah. The
in
excuses are
their
really
lives,
easy.
why, what made them this way. You're exploiting a child, plain
Yeah.
and simple.
Well, and that so a lot of them deal with that criticism of your show where someone says, well, you're creating the situations, because some of the
Right.
guys say that too, that you guys lured
Absolutely.
me here as if they're the victim. And so a critic of your show might say that, well, you're creating a scenario where this happens. Do you get that often? Or
We get that sometimes. We get it from the guys we catch,
yeah.
obviously. I wouldn't have done this. She taunted me. It was
Yeah.
her fault. They're great at deflection or
Oh yeah.
projection, maybe is a better word. But, law enforcement has been doing sting operations
Yeah.
for decades and
Mhm.
decades. I mean, back to the mob stings,
Oh yeah.
20s and 30s and 40s. That's how you investigate crime. I mean, the old saying is, crimes conceived in hell are not witnessed by angels. You have to get down
Yeah,
and
that's a good
dirty and
one.
get into the thing to find them. And so I'm very comfortable with our methodology and something else. All these years we've been doing this, we've been painstakingly open, transparent about our methodology. We
Yeah.
worked with Perverted Justice. We told people they were paid consultants. This is what they do. This is how we do it with them. We now show how we do it with law enforcement.
Yeah.
It becomes a much cleaner, more efficient prosecution to have the decoys be members of law enforcement
Yeah.
and have chain of custody of the chats, because the chats are, the backbone of any criminal
Oh yeah.
prosecution. Showing up is
Showing up.
shows
Yeah.
intent and is interesting and makes for compelling television, but it's the chat that makes the case.
Mhm.
That's where the crime is typically first committed.
Yeah.
So, we've evolved, but people know this. I
Mhm.
mean, I would hope that it's been a deterrent to some people. I
Yeah.
get, you know, correspondence from people who've listened to the podcast who talk about having um, in affinity for sex with a minor.
Mhm.
They know they have this issue for whatever reason, whether
Mhm.
it's nurture, nature,
Yeah.
and I don't pretend to know the answer to it, but they have this proclivity for this activity, and they tell me that they go to therapy, they have a healthy adult relationship, they've dealt with the issue of pedophilia or predatory behavior, whatever you want to call it, and they live with it, but
Yeah.
they control it. But many more do not.
Yeah. So that's proof that it is possible. You're not
It
just
is
exploiting a
possible,
group of people who have no control.
right?
Yeah. And you're not going out there and someone's just minding no business and you're implanting that idea in their head. They're looking
No,
around on the
there's a,
internet.
there's a whole protocol,
Yeah.
Owen, behind the scenes, and we talk about it in the stories.
Hmm.
The decoys never make the first approach,
Yeah. Right. Hmm.
right? Whether it's a scenario where it's an underage person selling themselves for sex, or a female relative or male relative selling them for sex, or whatever it is, or if it's a longer term relationship where a guy is trying to groom a child, which we see all the time.
Hmm.
I mean, these guys are out there. They're looking for
Yep.
opportunities, and predators find the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities in children. And we see it all the time. I mean, you look at some of these websites, some of these Instagram accounts or accounts on other social media where mothers are promoting their daughters in cheerleading or modeling swimsuits or any of that
Yeah.
stuff. You look at who's subscribing to that, and there's a disturbing percentage of them who are adult males talking amongst themselves. Oh, check out this girl, check out that girl. I
Yeah.
mean, this is an issue.
That worries me too when I think
Guys, a
about,
lot of these guys aren't the same guy, right? So
yeah.
we want lock them all up, you know,
Mhm.
have capital punishment for predators. Um, or no, they need treatment and help and discussion. They're not the same guy,
Yeah.
right? Some are, some are not.
Yeah.
So we don't have easy answers, and this is not a glamorous part of medicine. I mean, if you
Oh
spend
yeah.
$2,000 on medical school, do you want to be a plastic surgeon on Park Avenue?
Yeah. I
Want
saw your
to
interview. You were talking to a psychologist
yeah.
or a clinician
Yeah, or
about that.
do
Yeah.
you want to go into federal prisons and deal with the
Yeah.
dregs of society? You know, but
Yeah.
that's
It's
how
not
you
a lot of pay
understand what these
reward
guys think. Yeah, exactly.
for a doctor doing it. But so let me ask you just this question. You come around the corner, there you are, you're in the same room. There are
Right.
police in the building, but the guy can get to you first. I mean, there's going to be a moment there that's very dangerous before the police get out. How's that feel when you first come around the corner and say, "Hey, what are you doing here right now?"
Well, it's always, a tense moment, and I'm very aware of the fact that you can never take this lightly,
Mm-hmm.
that whether it's your first time doing it with your, heart in your throat, or if it's your 400th time doing it, you have to be incredibly aware. And it does take journalism to a different level.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of journalists go overseas and they cover wars, and that's very
Yeah,
dangerous. And and I face my fears and my dangers in my own way. But we never take that lightly. And there's a protocol, and we all know what to do in the worst case scenario. We've made it absolutely as safe as
yeah,
something like this can be. I'm comfortable with the risk. My crew is comfortable with the risk. And again, we don't get into all the precautions because we don't want to give a roadmap for
oh yeah,
somebody
yeah. No, I
to
know.
get around them. But a lot of thought goes into
Oh
it.
sure,
A
I'm
lot
just
of
thinking about the
coordination
courage
with
of.
law enforcement. No, well, it's Marie Curie said, in life there's nothing to fear, only to understand. And so if you
Mhm.
break it down and you understand what you're doing, you can make it absolutely as safe as possible.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and so that's what I've done with this. But absolutely, any fool can be fearless. It takes, somebody to think about it for a
Yeah,
minute to develop the level of comfort where you can have the courage to go do something like this.
yeah.
And that's what we've done. You try to take the mystery out of it as much as possible. But look, there are some realities here. Part of the reason why this has become wildly popular over three generations of people is because it is edgy.
Mhm.
It's because there is a dark sense of humor to it. People ask me all the time, did it bother you when South Park did a parody? No, that's pop culture. That's
Mhm.
what happens when are involved in the creation of something that has become
Yeah,
it's relevant for
yeah.
whatever combination of reasons.
Yeah, I
And
don't
so,
remember which band it was. It might have been NSYNC or Backstreet Boys, but they said I knew I made it when Weird Al made a song mimicking one of our songs.
yeah,
So it's kind of like that. If South Park's doing something, then
right. I mean, I went from just another dad at the high school my boys
yeah,
attended to being the cool dad because I was on South Park.
yeah,
There's a lot of dads in that high school who are on TV or Wall Street Titans or,
Mhm.
heads of the FBI. But, once South Park does you, then
Yeah. That's
you're
right.
cool in that demographic.
Yeah, but so back to the philosophical stuff. As you come around the corner, you begin to ask some questions. What I've always noticed is you're asking them for you're or providing them with the opportunity for self knowledge. Now, you as a journalist, you quoted Mary Curie and said, "I want to understand." So you want to understand, you want to help us understand, but it's also offering them a chance at self knowledge. And it's really interesting to me. I haven't seen any of them actually come out on that other side. And maybe I have missed an episode where it happened, but I've seen a lot of episodes. But you run through some pretty straightforward questions. Why are you here? And their excuses are humorous, just in a tragic sense of
Yeah.
I'm here to sometimes I'm here to help her. I'm worried about her because she's online talking to creeps. It's like, well, yeah, you're the guy she's talking to.
How about calling the police department or the
Yeah,
sheriff's office or 911 or Child
yeah.
Family Services? They don't have an answer to that.
No, they'll always have this kind of self justification. And a lot of times it does try to present them either as a hero in the story or as someone that they try to get you to pity them and feel bad for them. Something went wrong for me. And that level of self justification, you're pretty good at cutting through it because they'll give you all kind of excuses. And you've heard them all before at this point.
Yeah, and we do have some breakthrough moments. There was a guy who was a teacher in Cincinnati who traveled to one of our stings years ago in Greenville, Ohio, not far from Dayton. And I was working him and working him and working him. He's a young guy, 25, 26 years old, and taught kids about the same age as
Yeah.
the one he was going to see. And he knew where I was going with it. And finally, after back and forth and monosyllabic answers, he you could see the breaking point,
Yeah.
right? And he got there and he said something to the effect of, I was online in the very early access to it all, and I was talking to people my own age. And as I progressed, I got older and they stayed
Yeah.
younger.
Hmm.
And I just became comfortable with this access and I blurred the lines and here I am.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what happens in our 24/7 data-driven access culture is that there's an element of um, anonymity.
Mm-hmm.
Guys start saying and doing things they wouldn't say face to
Oh,
face.
yeah.
They embolden themselves. There's this 24/7 access, as I mentioned, and then there's this addictive nature to it.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly it becomes acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And philosophically, they think, okay, well, she's game,
Yeah.
I'm game,
Mm-hmm.
and especially when you see these younger guys get caught up in it, they're thinking, well, okay, I'm 22, she's
Yeah.
13, 14. If it works out in 7 or 8 years, it won't be such a big deal. Well, it is a big deal now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no difference in my mind and in the mind of law enforcement as to the danger that could be caused by a 21-year-old man or a 51-year-old man. It's the
Yeah.
same level of danger.
Yeah. In terms of
This isn't a,
the child is still not able to make those
right.
kinds of life
Make those kinds
altering
of decisions. And
choices.
this isn't a Romeo and Juliet thing. I mean, this isn't a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old who are both in the same high school.
Mhm.
That's not what we're talking about here. We don't,
Yeah. Yeah.
we wouldn't make that a part of the show or the sting, and nor would law enforcement. But you get into a different area when it's 18 and 14.
Yeah. Oh,
That's a
yeah.
big age difference,
Mm-hmm.
18 and 14. And so we have to have these discussions sometimes when that occurs in real life. It doesn't happen very often. Most of the time it's, somebody well into their 20s
Oh, yeah. Or older. Yeah.
targeting somebody or way older. I mean, we've had guys in their 70s.
Yeah. Yeah. Those for me, those are the ones that puzzle me the most. I think they're the most tragic because you'd think in King Lear's fool says to King Lear, the most honest thing in the whole story, you shouldn't have grown old until you grew wise.
Yeah.
In other words, being an old fool is the worst. And you think to yourself, you don't got a lot of time left, man. You just made this choice. You don't got a lot of time left to learn the lesson, change yourself, improve things. And it's just kind of heartbreaking to think you could get to that age. It's kind of a lesson for all of us. You better watch out.
Well, it is. And we had a guy, who was, his early to mid 70s, and he had retired once and went back to work at a car dealership in Birmingham, Alabama. And he got popped once in a prostitution sting, but the victim would have been an adult in that case. And that was embarrassing. And everybody said, okay, don't do it again. And his wife took him back and the company took him back. And all of a sudden he's in our sting talking to somebody who's 14 years old, who he thinks is 14. It's like, God,
Mm-hmm.
now you're in handcuffs. Everybody's going to see this.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a company car you drove over here to the Sting
Oh
house.
man, yeah.
Yeah, he had to drive 45 minutes to an hour to get there and walks in and is telling me how much he appreciates what I do and wants to
Did
shake
he
my
say?
hand in
Oh
cufflinks.
yeah, I remember
I
that
mean,
guy. Yeah,
in handcuffs.
behind your back.
Um,
Yeah.
so I shake my head and I try to get them to explain. He said, I'm lonely and I just wanted to prove that I could still do it and have sex. It's like,
Yeah.
God. There's a million ways to do that without
Yeah.
exploiting a child.
Well, you point that out to them. There's people your age, but even that, is still within the realm, let's say, of potentially sexual immorality. But you're saying you're not exploiting and hurting another person. You're doing it with a consenting adult,
Right.
and that's not what's interesting to them. And I think you hit on it earlier that there's probably in each person's case a slippery slope from pornography down to here. And that should warn anybody that if you start on there, you shouldn't think to yourself, well, I'm better than that person, I won't end up there. It's a slippery slope.
It
And as
is a
soon as you
slippery
start
slope.
going down that
In
way,
almost, and I'm not trying to be Pollyanna
oh
or,
yeah,
overly onerous about what adults should look
yeah,
at or view. That's not what this is about. But I can tell you without fear of contradiction that there is a definite link between viewing pornography and child porn and, porn that's made to look like
yeah.
your
Once you get into the
children,
virtual stuff that's just
and,
computer
and
animated.
and you're headed down that road.
Mm-hmm.
And there is without question a link there.
Yeah, well, I
And
think you
that's what's
said it
happening
earlier,
to some of these guys.
the idea of satisfying desire. You're satisfying your desire this way, and it doesn't work. I mean, it's a similar thing with drugs, right? This
Yeah.
amount of drugs, this doesn't work anymore. I need more.
Yeah. And
And
it's
so,
a narcotic. It's a
yeah,
narcotic effect for sure.
yeah. So as soon as your life is revolving around that, then it's just a matter of what will keep you from doing this. And your show demonstrates that even huge consequences may not be enough to keep people from doing it. People who, when you come around the corner, they say, "Oh, Chris Hansen." So
Yeah.
you've seen the show.
Right. Have we not created any sense of deterrence in
Yeah.
society?
Well, and something that comes up often as well is I have a hard time meeting women. And so they're already online, maybe to do online dating, which is something that's popular. That's fine. But now they're on this side of the internet. And I wonder if there's something there as well that these persons not only want to meet someone for sex, they want to meet someone who they can manipulate because they're a
Yes.
younger person whose mind is not formed all the way yet, compared to someone their age, which will be harder to manipulate.
Well, I think it's a control thing
Yeah.
in some aspects. It's wanting to dominate in some ways. And one of my big fears is when we see somebody, as we have recently, come in, with a gun on them,
Mm.
legally owned, legally possessed. But what happens if
Well, you
we're
didn't
not
see it first. It was
there?
kind of behind, and the sheriff saw it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And um, I didn't see. Usually, I can pick up what they're carrying, and I'll ask that question.
Yeah.
And if they put it on the table and slide it aside, that's one thing. But if it gets edgy, you'll see the sheriffs come out just like they did in that
Yeah.
particular case. But what happens when there is a child there and it doesn't go his way, or it goes uh, south in some other way, and he wants to eliminate the evidence, or he's got the option of having a gun there, and the gun at the time of the travel to meet the girl is legally possessed, but once he commits the felony,
Oh
it's
yeah,
having a firearm in the
that's
commission
right.
of felony, so it adds to the charges. But it gives me pause in that respect. I know there are parts of the country where we work where it's, you're more likely to see somebody carrying
Mm-hmm.
a concealed weapon, just
Yeah.
as how the laws are there.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes me anxious as to what could happen when the guy's
Yeah.
loaded with a child.
Or even just a knife. I mean, get a knife out real quick and lunge at
Whatever.
somebody.
At the
Yeah.
end, you strangle somebody. I mean,
Yeah.
it goes
Now,
bad.
one of my favorite questions you ask though is, you see how this looks, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'll joke sometimes. Ask you see how this looks, right? Because
Right.
that usually comes up in the conversation a few steps in when they've given you some justifications. Well, I'm just here to help this person. I want to check on her because she was involved in this discussion. I'm really worried about her, and so you'll say, yeah, you see how this looks, right? And I love how that kind of brings out of them, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a point where they realize their mind is not the only judge of this. There are
Right.
other humans looking in, and they have to deal with those moral judgments. Do you notice that yourself in
I
person?
do. And it's a technique I picked up many, many years ago doing investigative or enterprise reporting. And it's one that the lawyers always quietly cheered for during the screenings, and whatever topic it was, because you confront somebody, whether it's a business executive who's using child slave labor in India, or whatever the crime is, And they lay it out there and they have their defense. And, they often mount a counterattack. And then I look at them, I said, well, you can understand how people would see this, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you get them to understand the other side of morality
Hmm.
and they admit that what they're doing is wrong, then you can start to get at the truth.
Yeah.
And I'm not pretending that I philosophically sat down, and wrote this all out or figured it out
Oh,
or
sure.
studied it. It sort of evolved over time
Yeah.
of doing this sort of reporting something in my toolbox that I often
Yeah.
use. And the other one that I picked up from Mike Wallace many years ago, the famous 60 Minutes
Hmm.
correspondent, was just to look at somebody and say, explain.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of times interviewers are afraid of dead air or space. Well, use it as your friend.
Yeah.
Let people are get uncomfortable when
Oh,
there's,
yeah.
and sometimes I'll just lay it out there, and the guy thinks he's gonna, just it's all gonna end because he doesn't talk. And it's like, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
I got nothing but time and videotape
Hmm.
or chips now, I
Yep.
suppose.
Yep.
But so you can either tell me about it or we can spend a lot of time here.
Yeah.
And then you put the onus on them to philosophically justify or take acceptance, take responsibility.
Well, and I think that's what it does so well is there's the first level of self-justification to you and to themselves out loud and whoever they figure is watching. I did this for these good reasons. And I didn't, no one was going to get hurt. I wasn't really going to. I was about to leave. I knew I shouldn't have come in. They give you
Yeah.
all these ones,
Yeah.
and then you say, "But you see how this looks, right?" And that's when it first starts. That self justification starts to crumble a little bit because they realize there's objectivity to it. You can't just talk your way out of it in your own mind. Other people are going to assess your quality of thought and say, "No, that's not quality. That's not sound." And the
Right.
second thing you do, which everyone loves, is you'll read the texts. I'm not going to imitate that here because they're juicy, so to speak. But
Yeah.
you'll read
Yeah.
these texts in a kind of just a straightforward factual, and then you say, "What do you mean by that?"
Mhm.
And it's very clear. But what it does to them is it puts them on the spot to explain something that now they know the whole world, so to speak.
Well,
See,
it also it takes something that was maybe pretend in some ways, or at least started off, as not being a part of their reality because it was done online.
yeah,
And this is what I mean by the anonymity. And suddenly it's
yeah,
not an anonymous thing
well,
anymore.
exactly, yeah.
You know,
And you
we
have to explain these things. You're
just because it
saying,
was anonymous doesn't mean it's okay
yeah.
or it's legal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crime. And
Well, and
so you
I think
confront them
that's
with that, they sometimes give it up.
yeah, because I think what it does is most of them I've heard. I'll say most of them. I don't know what the percentage would be. 70% of them seem to always say, "Oh, I didn't notice when she said 15, or I didn't have my glasses on, or I was driving and didn't notice that part of the text." And so they'll try to get out of it. And some of them will say, "I thought it was just pretend. I saw her picture. She looked older. I thought we we're just pretending." And those don't work because that means you're still pretending to be doing this, right? That's still in your fantasy life. And when you get to that level, I think it's some of the more honest interviews. So you'll ask them, so this is something you fantasize about, and they can't say no because there it is.
It's right there.
But no one, they don't want to say that they do.
No, and sometimes they're honest and they'll get into it, and sometimes they pound their head against the wall and say, take me away, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think part of this is that they've gotten away with it for so long.
Well, yeah, I saw one of your psychologists you taught who gave a statistic that it's like 7 per year,
Right,
and on average, it's 4 years until they end up on your show or they get caught somehow.
right,
So that's
right.
yeah, that's
Which
really
is stunning to me. But it because they get away with it, then they get addicted to it. So there's the thrill of it. What's going to happen? Is it
well,
law
yeah,
enforcement? Is it police? It's
yeah,
it's almost like, a junkie in the 70s
mm-hmm.
scoring heroin up in Harlem.
Yeah,
There's a 20% chance it's going to be a sting operation. But they do it anyway because they need the heroin. It happens today. People are still addicted to heroin or, fentanyl or whatever
yeah,
it is.
whatever it is, yeah.
But
Well, I think
there's,
that
and now they know there's a 20% chance that there's fentanyl in the heroin, but
yeah,
they roll the
really
dice and get it anyway because they need to feed the habit. Well, they know it's a 20% chance. It's either one of my stings or it's law
somebody else,
enforcement,
yeah. Well, the internet
across.
doesn't go away. I mean, even if you don't
No.
get caught right now, the internet's out there.
Yeah.
And I think that's something. That's what I wonder about too. Is this particular crime? Is there something to people who have an addictive personality combined with risk-taking personality and very low self-discipline. So that someone might say, well, men generally are more given to risk-taking than women, and so you're already going to be mostly catching them. But most of us can control that risk taking because we weigh it with what will the consequences be. I'm not going to put my
Right.
whole mortgage on roulette table. And so this seems to be persons who never developed that level of self control.
Exactly. And so I think it all plays into it. And these are people who have lack of self-control. And it's not just, people who have addictive patterns in their lives. There's people who are, show up drunk or drug-addled. I mean, we see people who used to be in law enforcement,
Yeah, you've had professors. Yeah, you've had retired
professors.
policemen. Yep.
We had recently we had a professor from Eastern Michigan University,
Mm-hmm.
and he admitted it. And they start in their own minds thinking that, okay, well, I'll find somebody who's vulnerable and I'll fix them.
Yeah.
I'll give them aid. And then they see, well, there's an opportunity here.
Yeah. A lot of
We
times
can
it
take
seems
this to
like
the next level,
the adult child relationships, whether it's an older man and a younger girl or an older man and a younger boy, they seem to start off with this idea that I'm going to mentor this person,
Right.
and somehow sexuality comes into the mix. But that tells us, I mean, this could be pretty rampant. It could be somebody who you're in class with, a colleague. You were riding the train to work with a guy
Yeah.
who he got out of the car and was like, "Oh no, Chris,
He
no."
just did something to violate parole the other day.
He did.
Yeah,
Oh
he
no.
was dusted up, and I don't think it was anything serious, but it was, enough to drag him into
Sure,
court.
but yeah, he immediately
People
said,
call him.
"Oh no, Chris, no, no," and like
Yeah,
reality
this is not
sets
what it
in.
looks like. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, imagine this guy, right? Who's not a good friend, but he was sort
sure,
of
yeah,
in the mix socially in the club car on the train going between New York and Connecticut. And I didn't even recognize him at first when he walked in, and he looked familiar. And when he ran off, I thought, well, maybe he just knows me from television. And then I listened to the tape again. I thought, that's the guy from the train. And I called one of my buddies, said, "What's the name of the guy?" And I described it.
mm-hmm.
He told me, and yeah, I mean, it was, there's always a backstory. Then you sort of find out that, well, he was seen here with
Okay.
younger guys and this and that, and it's the
Yeah,
whole
I
back.
wonder. I don't. I mean, it'd be hard to know, but it'd be curious to see if you're sort of a flame that could attract people because it's kind of a thrill to be. I'm around Chris Hansen
Right.
doing this stuff, and I mean, who
Well, I
couldn't?
never thought of it that way. That's kind of an interesting way to look at it. I mean, he sure knew who I was when he walked into the Sting
Yeah,
House.
yeah,
Oh, Chris, it's not, and it was one of those funny situations where he was going back out to the car to get some porn videos.
mm-hmm.
Now, at that point, do you let him go and does he take off or do you try to get
Yeah,
him back in for the interview? And I chose to try to get him back in for the interview and he split. But he very definitely knew who I was.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing that stands out to me philosophically though is that even once we factor in, say, addictive personality plus risk taking and low self control, you're not a child anymore. So if you're a middle aged or older, I'm even 20 years on up, to not have mastered those things to some extent to avoid massive problems like this is your own fault. Like
He did.
you can't blame your parents anymore. You can't blame if you
No.
wanted self control, you would have developed it.
And, even as a young man, I look back, it would have been so looked down upon,
Hmm.
in our 20s, when I was a young reporter in Detroit, to date somebody who was still in college I mean, there's a massive difference in
Mm-hmm.
maturity.
Yeah,
And what do you talk about anyway?
yeah,
It's just, you can't, it's inappropriate at every level.
yeah. And I think there's that social disapprobation where society looks down on you, but then maybe it's more rampant now, but people don't seem to care. The guys you meet,
Right.
in one
Well,
sense, I mean, they
I
don't
think
like getting caught.
the internet has changed that.
Yeah,
I tell my kids stories all the time about, when I was in college, you had to find people.
yeah,
Nobody had a cell phone. Nobody even had pagers in those days. You had to leave
yeah,
a sticky note on a bulletin board in a dorm room and say, "I'm going over here," or "Have you seen so and so?" And you've tracked them down.
yep,
But they're amazed that, people found each other and they
yeah,
went from one campus to another and they had fun and drank
mhm,
beer and carried on.
yeah.
And did all the stuff without cell phones
And
and
yeah,
without,
you had to develop some level of social virtues in the sense of you got to
yeah,
be able to hold a conversation
right.
with a
You got to go face
woman
to face. You got to
and
find
make her
somebody.
interested in you.
Exactly. And this doesn't, uh, the internet has allowed that to turn into what we have today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a lot of good that's come out of it, obviously. It's not going away,
Yeah.
but it has created a different dynamic than, what I certainly grew up with.
But the level of so they have self justification, which I think you break through really well with your objectivity. You know how this looks, and let me read the texts.
Yeah.
But then the little bit harder nut to crack is self deception,
Hmm.
where they'll get to a point where they're willing to go along with you, but in their own mind they don't yet see this as a problem. They might even say, yeah, I know it's wrong, and some of them have daughters that age. They'll say, yeah, that would make
Hmm.
me upset if my daughter did it. But because you catch the same person again later, you know that self deception hasn't been broken through yet. And that's the one I'm always watching for in your interviews to see, does it get through to this person, or are they still, they're basically just using reason to justify themselves to you and the cameras, but they haven't yet used it to lead the examined life and ask, am I leading a good life? Like, what am I doing myself? I mean,
Yeah, and I don't think that happens in the moment that I'm with them, in the moments that I'm with them. I mean, I think that a lot of these guys know going in that it's wrong, of course. It's illegal, it's risky, and that there's the potential of running into me or law enforcement. And so on the way over, whether it's a fast mover 15 minutes away or somebody drives for 4 hours,
yeah,
they're thinking, okay, what if this is a setup? What if I am getting caught? What am I going to say? So
yeah,
they start this
build a narrative. Yeah.
rationalization in their mind. Okay, well, I was going to just come over and check on the girl, which is what one of the guys told us recently in a sting in Alabama. Now, he knew the sheriff.
And you always ask after a sexually charged conversation.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He knew the sheriff because the sheriff had helped in a church group for guys who were struggling in different
Oh
areas with
yeah, I
substance
remember
abuse,
that one.
whatever. So he had the sheriff's private cell phone number. So if he thought this girl was in such trouble, he could have
Mm-hmm.
texted the sheriff and said, "Hey, there's this girl online who's doing whatever, and she's in your county. You might want to go check on her." So he could have done that, but
And was he the one that the sheriff's church was helping him like get over some other past?
that's
Okay.
another fellow. Yeah, but this guy hasn't aired yet, but he will very soon. And but there was another guy whose mother was in the church, and this guy was a worked in a school and was engaged to a teacher, and he shows up for a teenage boy, and again, he wasn't necessarily, academically the sharpest fellow in the
Mm-hmm.
world, but he was a fellow who could make his own decisions, and he certainly would have provided a danger
Mm-hmm.
to a child.
Yeah. Well, I think that the question you ask that I think gets closest to kind of cracking the nut of self deception, or at least not letting them go on easily, is this something that you think about? Do you think about being with underage children? Because the truth of the matter is the answer for them is yes.
Hmm.
Obviously, right? They're texting about it, they're driving over about it, they're on websites about it. But I don't, there might have been one guy that said it, but most of them will not say yes. They will not confront that about themselves.
Yes.
That's such a horrible thing to see in yourself that they cannot do it. And they
But I
just
think
take
it's
that line.
interesting. It's interesting you bring that up and helpful to me because I think that's maybe I need to spend some more time developing some questions along those lines to see what
Mm-hmm.
happens. To
Yeah.
me, anybody can jump out of the
Yeah.
back room and make 10 seconds of dramatic television and just beat the heck out of these guys. The challenge for me, at least, in my mind, is to get inside their heads and
Mm-hmm.
understand how they think and how this works. Because if you can understand a predator's mind, you can better protect people from
Yeah.
being victimized by predators, which is the,
Yeah.
whole reason, one of the reasons we do this. So that's probably something I need to focus a little more on going forward, and I will. But I
Well, I
appreciate
think the
it.
blurring the reality between reality and then virtual reality
Yeah,
is probably significant because they're
it
pretending
is.
this stuff all the time online,
Right. But
and
if you
now
get
they're
into
doing it
if
in
you
real life.
ask the question, how intensely do you focus on child porn
Yeah.
or this
Role
area?
playing online or
How
something.
how much of your day do you spend thinking about this?
Mm-hmm.
We had a guy who and the episode hasn't aired yet, but this was down in Louisiana, a guy who had actually been in the New Orleans Police Academy.
Mhm.
And so he had some training, and he washed out for a number of reasons, but had this whole master slave
Hmm.
fetish that he tried to play out with a young
Hmm.
teenage girl, and was smart enough not to go to the house, but was trying to kept sending Ubers, sent like 4 Ubers to
Really?
get the girl to come from where we were to New Orleans. And we got one of the Uber drivers to cooperate in the investigation, and we recorded the conversations, and you hear him telling her it doesn't matter, she's okay, you can just bring her, I'll take care of
Yeah.
her. And, they arrested him. I interviewed him at length after the fact. And he tried to sell me on the fact that this is all fantasy and that's what
Yeah.
happens in these chat rooms. And, well, it's
Mhm.
not a fantasy when it comes to a child. It's a
Mhm.
crime.
But it also follows the pattern we've already talked about. The fantasy won't satisfy forever.
Yeah.
You're going to need, they're going to
Yeah.
act
Yeah.
out. And for
Yeah.
every one you
You
catch,
need
there's
you need the
30 that you
heroin.
didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In spite of the fear of the fentanyl, you need the heroin.
Yeah. And you have to keep going in it. So that seems to indicate, you used the word earlier, evil. And I've also heard you talk about monsters. Our culture tends to not use either of those terms. We tend to explain everybody as having been a product of their environment. So in our major movies, the villain, we need a backstory that
Right.
explains the villain as a guy. Well, he got picked on in elementary school, so now he wants to blow the world up or something. But I think you're getting at something deeper, that there could be something in us beyond our environment, and it manifests itself in evil ways.
Well, I think there are monsters out there. I think there are predators who just don't care
Mhm.
about the laws
And you
or
don't
the
need a backstory like
proper
about
society.
bullied or something. That's what they
No, I
do.
think I think some people are just that way. And we've seen these guys, the incorrigibles,
Mm-hmm.
right? And some want to talk about it and some don't. But I guarantee you there's a certain percentage of these guys who are like the fellow I just talked about, who we caught in Polk County, Florida, who had already been caught in Bloomington, Minnesota, who's now caught again. And what else is out there? If this guy couldn't
Yeah.
control himself after being busted once in a sting, busted a second time in a sting, and then essentially caught in bed with
Yeah.
another child.
Mm.
And there's some talk that he was trying to coerce this child into covering up yet a fourth
Hmm.
sexual assault with an underage person. And then what's going to stop the guy?
Yeah.
Nothing except prison.
Yeah. Well, that's something you spoke about with, I think most of the sheriffs hinted this, but the one from Florida, what's that county in Florida?
Grady Judd in Polk County, Florida.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Polk County, Florida. He specifically just said they cannot be cured.
Yeah.
All you can do is lock them up.
And look, people are drawn to Grady Judd for a lot of different reasons. He's very charismatic on camera. I've known him for 40 some years, from
Wow.
back when he was a lieutenant and I was a young reporter in Tampa. And I'll tell you this about Grady Judd is he's a thinking man,
Mm.
right? This isn't just a reactionary thing.
Oh, sure.
These
Yeah.
statements are not for the purpose
Is
of
a career? He's had a whole career of
he's had a
observing.
whole career, but he thinks at a higher level, right? He looks at the problems in society. He studies behavior. He's made a science out of this. And when he says that there are guys out there who can't be fixed, he knows what he's talking
Yeah.
about. He's got a great deal of credibility, but he's a very thoughtful guy,
Mhm.
and he understands the criminal mind. I always enjoy working with him. Have since like I said, 42 years ago.
Wow.
But I mean, he's given this a great deal of thought. This
Yeah.
is some reactionary guy out there just
Yeah.
saying stuff to make headlines.
No, yeah. I mean, I took the analysis I saw of him. He broke it down in terms of what their behavior's like, and it's a warning to the community, because it seems like one of the faults we have right now is a kind of rampant, uncontrolled empathy. And in some sense, that's good, right? You want to be empathetic, you want to hope the best for people, but it could be abused. And I think
Oh,
people
it
like
is
this,
it's
yeah,
routinely abused,
people like this know how
especially
to abuse empathy.
right. And we've seen cases in California and in other jurisdictions. And I understand the need for plea bargain, and I understand the value of a first-time offender having to register as a sex offender so we know where that person is. But there has been in the past situations where judges have looked at this as a television reality show and not as an actual
Mm.
crime.
Mm.
And that's wrong.
Yeah.
This is a crime. And so you see guys in many cases who have gotten light sentences who go on to reoffend.
Yeah.
Some certain percentage will say, God, that was close. I should have been doing that. I'll never do that again. And they don't
But
do
it's
it
a
again.
pretty small percentage, it sounds like. I mean,
It is. It is. It's probably higher than you might think. But we talk about that in the podcast too. We'll come across a case and say, look, the guy's running an art studio now. He's
yeah,
complied
yeah.
with his probation. He's no longer a registered sex offender, or he is, and
Yeah, that's
he's
great.
he's never reoffended. And good on him. You
Yeah,
know,
there's some cases like that that are, you're right. Those are good to hear because you don't want to leave people with the
the
impression
ones that
it's
make the news are the guys
only
like
like this. Yeah.
the one we popped in Polk, who's now back in trouble again.
Yeah. But it seems like that the empathy or the desire to understand, these guys know about that. And
Yeah.
they either intuitively or consciously can manipulate because of that. And they almost always do that with you in the sense that it immediately turns into a sob story about themselves.
Well, they always think they can figure out a way out of it,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not
Yeah. Am I
because
going to
there are
jail? They'll say,
multiple
am I going to
players
jail
here.
now?
First
Like,
of all, I'm not going to let them out. Yeah, that's not up to me, or we'll get to that in a minute, or because I'm prolonging that inevitable reality to find out as much about them as I can. So there's a lot of ways to deal with that in the interview process, but ultimately, if they don't want to talk to me, they can talk to the detectives. And we've had cases where they haven't wanted to talk to the detectives, but they get fanboy like when they see me and then they tell me the whole story. We've had that
yeah.
happen
Oh
too.
yeah.
So it
Yeah. It could go both
cuts
ways.
both ways.
Yeah. The idea though that they're going to get out of it, and they'll sometimes say, I got to get to work tomorrow, just so you know, like
Yeah.
they still got plans
Yeah.
the next day.
Yeah. And yeah, this is fine. It's horrible. I'll fix this later, but
Yeah.
I got to be at the show tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Now, one other dimension I want to ask about is religion. It kind of came a moment ago because one of your sheriff's church was helping a guy. But every
Hmm.
now and then religion comes up, or you'll ask about, are you a man of faith? Or they'll maybe mention a relative who's faithful, and you'll bring that up. Do you go to church? And these statistics tell us this is not, no religion is immune from this.
No,
It's not
no.
as if you're in this religion, then this isn't happening. In fact, I think with one of the psychologists you talked with, those could be a draw because the predators know this is an environment where I could be given access and where everyone's going to think the best of me.
Yeah, exactly. And look, what we find is, whether it's a demographic group or an age group or, we get whatever lives in that area.
Mm-hmm.
We don't control who walks into the sting house. They make the decision. They pick us. We don't pick them. So I see on social media sometimes, well, why is the guy always this? Or why is the guy always that? Or you seem to find more. No, they pick
Whoever
us.
comes at, yeah.
Yeah, we don't choose. We don't control it.
Yeah.
They choose.
Yep.
And so we get what is reflective of reality in that particular demographic in that area,
Yeah.
and it crosses all lines.
Yeah.
We've had clergymen walk in.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember those.
A
And
guy in Ohio who was counseling people with sexual problems in jails. People were there for sex crimes. He's counseling them, and here he is showing up for a daddy-daughter
I
scenario.
remember that one. Yeah. He
Yeah,
was
he got
doing
busted
counseling.
again. Donnie Vaughn got busted again. Now he's back in prison.
Really.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah. He was doing counseling for this. That was just,
yeah.
yeah. The guy that creeps me out the most is the one that had the necklace and a
Oh,
whole
that
backpack
was
of
the same
kit, like the kit that he
investigation.
takes
Yeah,
around. And
yeah,
he would, it was just creepy to think there's guys like this traveling the country meeting young teenage girls.
yeah. And normalizing the relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. He's the one where it didn't feel, I mean, there's no way he's being honest with you given what he's
No,
been
there's
doing.
more out there on that
Yeah.
one for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, religion does. And I think that's important for people to hear that you don't want to be naive and think, well, now I'm in a safe place at church or something, because those could be targeted by these kinds of predators as places to be. So churches need to know you've got to have protocol for this very clearly laid out.
Well, predators will exploit any environment that they can, whether it's
Yeah.
big brothers, big sisters, or, theoretically, we've seen cases, Boy Scouts of America, any group where there are vulnerable people, they will find it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it comes down to really the conversation parents have with their children on these things.
Mm-hmm.
And, whether they're young kids at home or kids in college. I mean, we have cases where, young men have been exploited by criminals half a world away in these sextortion matters,
Mm.
where they pretend to be a young woman. They send them an enticing photo. They send one back, then they extort them. And some of
Yeah.
these kids are committing suicide,
Wow.
in their high school years. And it's
Do you
shocking.
think you're ever, because this is always a kind of a sexual predator thing, but do you think you're ever on the cusp of also seeing a sex trafficking possibility
Oh
going on?
yeah. Yeah. And we see that scenario from time to time where somebody will say, "Hey, look, you don't need to be operating on your own here. I can help you, or I can help you make money, or you can work with me." And yeah, and that's trafficking. That's a pimp looking to add to
Yeah.
his stick.
So give us Chris Hansen's philosophy of free will. Do we have free will after what you've experienced all these years?
I think we have free will that is confined by morality, um, your intellectual ability to decide right from wrong, and anybody has choice, right?
No.
And so you have to have the intellectual capability and the moral capability to make the right choice. And I'm no, philosophical genius here, but I've seen enough to know
You got
that,
the experience of it. Yeah.
yeah, but people make decisions,
Yep.
and you are held accountable for those decisions.
Yeah.
And you
Well, that's,
need to find your path in life where you can live within the confines of society to make it a safe place and to make it a place that is, you know, enjoyable in which to live. I mean, that's like everybody's duty, right?
mhm.
Everybody's got a different job.
Minimally. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you shouldn't be bothering people who don't want to be bothered.
Yeah. Well, that kind of gets to the say the golden rule, which you also get at when you ask them, do you have children? Or if you did have children this age, what would you do? And most of them will tell you, yeah, that would make me mad also. But their
Right.
life doesn't show that, right? What they're doing says, I don't think you believe the
Well,
golden
they have
rule.
this horrible ability to compartmentalize.
Yeah,
We
that's
all
right.
have to compartmentalize, right?
Yeah.
You have to set aside the fact that your feet hurt, but you have to walk across the city. You have to compartmentalize the fact that you want something that you can't afford, that you want to eat something you shouldn't eat
Yeah.
because you've been having too many desserts. We all compartmentalize things to focus on the task in front of us. But there are basic rules of life,
Yeah.
and without those rules, we have chaos, ungovernable chaos, and we have people doing whatever the hell they want whenever they want to do it. And that's not how it works.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the things that they often will say to you, which goes back to our beginning question, weakness of the will. And I think the way you summarize it right now is really good, which is you make your choice and you're responsible for that choice. And you did it. That's a free will. So whatever else was back here, in terms of you're bullied in elementary school, you had a mean dad. At this point, you made the choice. And what illustrates that is that when you say to them, why'd you do it? The closest they ever get is, I just made a bad decision. So then,
Yes.
okay, good. So now you agree it's a bad
Yeah.
decision.
Now we're
Why
getting
didn't
somewhere.
you then?
Right.
And the truth of the matter is they didn't think it was a bad decision then. That's why I always wait to see if it'll come out, is to say that they thought this is what they want. I wanted
Right.
to do this.
And sometimes it's just as simple as immediate gratification versus
Mhm.
the consequences of seeking to fulfill that. I mean,
Yep.
when you break it down to its lowest philosophical level, that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Just because you want something doesn't mean you can have it.
Yeah, and that's right. I want what I want. I'm going to do whatever I can. I don't care
Right.
who I hurt. And so I haven't yet seen that confession of like that what I call the root level. Like the fruit level is the behavior you just got them caught in. The root level is them having to face themselves, you as the interviewer, us as the audience, and God, and say, I wanted to do this horrible thing. I thought that it would be good for me to do this. And I haven't seen that honesty level yet of confession. But it keeps me tuning in because I want to see, does anybody get to that level?
I promise you, and I'll keep working to get
Oh, you do a
it.
good job. It's not you. It's that you got a hard nut to crack for that one. It's
Yeah.
really something where
Well, that's the goal, right? Is to get there. And I'm sure I'll find somebody at some point who may be able to do that for me. But
because they'd have to be able to
you got to keep
confess.
trying.
They'd have to be able to confess that this is who I am, and it's not good.
Yeah,
Now, last question.
sure.
You've been doing this 21 years, I think you said, right? I mean, you've been in journalism longer than that, but Do you have hope? How do you keep going? What's your hope right now? Do you think you'll be doing this and nothing changes? Like, tell us, how does Chris Hansen find hope?
Well, I think hope is through exposing this and educating people, because I think when parents see it, um, they can understand how important it is
Mm-hmm.
to have this discussion with their kids and to create an open dialogue where if something bad happens online, they can go talk to their parents. And it doesn't matter whether they're 12 years old or 22 years old, you need to keep, and this open conversation is good in families
Yeah,
on
yeah,
multiple different levels,
yeah.
right? It just happens in this case that it's generated from an awful crime.
Mm-hmm.
But many years ago, I had a dozen middle schoolers sitting in a group on risers. And it was very early in the Predatory investigations. I said, show of hands, tell me how many of you have been approached by an adult online and it made you feel uncomfortable.
Mm.
Well, 10 out of the 12 raised their hands. I said, tell me how many of you went to your parents? And they're looking down, they're kicking their feet together. And is it none of you went to your parents?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Why? And I said, we're afraid they're going to take the computer away. We're afraid they're going to
mm,
take away our internet access. So again, you just got to
yeah,
talk to these kids and tell them that this is out there, and it
yeah.
starts at a very young age with an age appropriate discussion. There are
And the ones
adults
that worry
online
me
who
is,
try to trick kids, and it
yeah.
starts there, and then you need to ratchet it up as kids get older. But I mean, you look at some of the things that happen on campus with some of your students, I'm sure, the catfishing,
Mm-hmm.
the trickery, the predatory behavior, the grooming. These kids aren't fully formed at 18 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and they can be vulnerable targets too, whether it's by an adult predator or by somebody who's their own age.
Yeah,
And so it's awareness, it's a discussion, it's a dialogue like the one, Owen, we've been having here,
yeah,
that creates, hopefully a safer environment, or an understanding of the fact that you don't have to be fearful of the world, but you do have to understand the world.
yeah, yeah. That's 100%. I think that's the right answer. And your work is helping parents. I mean, I'm a parent. I know it's helped me, and I think you're right. That's the place to go. Is this
Yeah.
informs parents who then are able to do their job better of teaching their children what's out there, and that's
And
the
look,
that's
there's no doubt, as we discussed, there's the drama of it, the edginess of it,
Mhm.
the dark, the humorous part of it. I mean, all that plays
Yeah,
together to make it very popular for people to see. But a lot of hard work goes into it to also make it safe and responsible, and something that people can use to create an environment that's better for their kids.
yeah,
And so I think at the end of the day, if we achieve what we want to, it's that.
yeah,
And that's the message that I try to get out to parents, who have kids the same age as your kids, or, my guys are, they're in journalism. I mean, they're doing what I do,
yeah,
in their own way, and one in front of the camera, one behind the camera. But we still have discussions about it. I
yeah,
still worry about them even in their
yeah.
30s.
Well, I think that's what the sheriff said in Polk County. You've got to teach your kids about the reality of evil.
Yeah.
You can't be naive about it, or they're the
You
ones
can't
that.
let it define you. You can't let it confine you, but you have to understand it. It's at the end of the day, it's all about knowledge without fear.
That was great to talk with Chris Hansen. Now, if you enjoyed the interview, please subscribe to my channel so you'll get alerts when future interviews are put out, and share it with people who you might also think would enjoy it, and leave a like. I'd also like to hear from you. If you have questions for me or Chris, put them in the comments, and I'll answer them. If they're for me, I'll send them along to him if they're for him. I think we got somewhere, but there's more to go. We got to the problem of self-deception and what a person needs to do to break through it, where they have to confront the fact that what is objectively evil, they thought it was okay. They thought it was good and they did it. And they have to confront that about themselves. So we got to that point, but I'm going to be very interested to see in future interviews that Chris does if he's able to get further than what we've seen so far, which is generally speaking, they stop with their own self-deception that it wasn't that big of a deal, it's not a big problem, and they have it under control, and they're not able to confront the reality of their condition. And that's really, as a philosopher, what I'm interested in is the truth about the human condition, what does that tell us about ourselves? And do we really know ourselves? So thanks again for joining me.